when we started, homeschooling wasn't fashionable. We weren't part of the first wave, the pioneering phase of the modern homeschool movement, but we were right behind it. So when you said something about homeschooling, you still had people looking at you strangely, deciding that you had separation anxiety, you couldn't give up your child or something like that. And we had heard about stories where well-meaning neighbors and social workers might turn you in for homeschooling. So we got pretty good at, when we showed up in public situations during school hours, that we had a doctor's appointment, or we learned that there's this thing called in-service. No one's ever sure what that means exactly. The parents of the kids who are in school don't know what that means exactly, but in-service worked. And then, of course, there would be the kind of questions like, do you like your teacher? Are there a lot of people in your class? And my son would say, oh, not too many. Is your teacher nicer than your mom? Oh, yes, she's very nice. So at the time, I had no idea of the religious implications of what I was doing. I just knew, having gone to private school all my life, 13 years of it actually, back in New York, I knew that my education hadn't gone away from me. I was still interested in reading things. I was still interested in learning things. But that wasn't true of a lot of people. It certainly wasn't true of my husband, who had been given a public school education and still struggled with reading because he hadn't learned phonics. Now, he was an adequate reader, but he took so much more mental power to do it without a phonetic approach that he had learned sight reading. And he would constantly talk about the times when he was in school that his parents were encouraged not to help him with his reading. And being good students of Dr. Spock, they listened to the teachers and didn't help him with his reading. Whereas I came from a family where I often say that if my mother had had the glimmer that anybody homeschooled, our family would have been a homeschooling family, because she loved to teach, and she helped us so much more, even at a good school that we had, getting us through the subjects. So when I'm approaching the idea of homeschooling, I have a little one, and I'm thinking, well, okay, I can do kindergarten, I can do first grade, and my husband was adamant. Once he gets older, we're going to send him to a real school. Which I took a little offense to. I mean, this was a real school. It just wasn't, your brick and mortar school. But as time went on, and we saw how we didn't have a student who hated learning, that we had a student who enjoyed learning, then we got the idea that maybe the traditional way was not all that good, only to discover the traditional way was a relatively new way, certainly in American history. Most people learned to read before they went to the one-room schoolhouse. They learned to read so that they could read the Bible. The early American primers were learning your alphabet with A was in Adam's fall, we sinned all. So by the time people got to school, they were going for maybe some more individualized help because their parents were, tending the farm or whatever it was. But it was never viewed that you'd sent your child to school to teach your child, that your child would learn everything he or she needed to know. There was this sense of parental responsibility. And I think you would agree, we've lost that a lot today. Because if you even broach the subject with homeschooling, the first question you get is, can you do that? As if there's the big, sword in the sky that's going to tell you you can't do it. Well, we've gotten so conditioned to need permission to do anything in our culture, which is really a far cry from what the Bible tells us. Your children were given to you. My children were given to me. We didn't ask for our particular children, nor did they ask for us, but God knew who he was placing where he was placing. Sometimes you get a child that's just like you when you were a child, and that's always fun. And then you have sometimes a child who doesn't think at all like you, and it's like, where did this person come from? And that's when you usually blame your husband. I found that's very workable. But in any case, so as you approach the idea of what do I want my school to look like, what I've discovered that today, a lot of people know why they don't want their children to be in the public school. But very few have taken a lot of time to think of what is it I want to produce in my home school. I find that when I counsel or mentor people, they can embrace the idea that, okay, the public school shouldn't tell me what to do, and then they look at me and they say, tell me what I should do. And I say, no, I'm not supposed to tell you what you should do. You're supposed to tell you what you should do. But I don't know anything. Well, first of all, that's not true. Of course you know something. You got here tonight, you're dressed, you've managed to teach your children how to walk and talk and use the bathroom. So there's lots of things you already know. Who taught you how to console your child when he has a boo-boo? Did you go to boo-boo class? I don't think so. You figured it out, because as a parent, there's some things that you learned by experience. In our household, I had one child who, when she was bad, this is not the child I'm talking about, but you could not spank this child hard enough, because she somehow or other could categorize that, oh, that's just pain. And so we had to get a little bit more creative how we would discipline her. When I tried to discipline her, like I disciplined her older sister, I could send her to Mars. I mean, she would say, all you had to do is give her a glimmer of a look that you were unhappy, and she was right in place. So part of what you do as a parent is you learn your children how they're different, and they are different. You think, well, they spent 9 months in the same place, but that doesn't really mean that they're going to be all that much the same. If you have 10 children, you'll have 10 separate children. The point is that you have to have a sense of what it is you want to accomplish. Do you just want to be better than the local public school? Well, in California, that's not hard. I would suggest that you want something a little bit more, a higher standard than that. Do you want somebody who can get high SAT scores? Is that all you want? Do you want someone who can get into college? Do you want someone who can get a good job? Or I would submit that as Christians, we should be interested in an educated person who is useful to God and is useful to utilize the talents that God gave that particular person. And so homeschooling parents have this wonderful opportunity to mine who God gave them. Now, you don't own them. You're given those children to steward their lives. And so part of the process is making sure that your children have adequately good teachers. And one of the things I've discovered in my 28 years, there are a lot of people who get started and they're very gung-ho, and then their kids get older, and then their kids start challenging them, and then their kids start telling them they don't want to do it anymore. And 9 times out of 10, I'll talk to mothers who'll say, I'm a failure. I shouldn't be doing this. I think I need to send my child to school. Why is that? He won't listen. I said, you really think that all the children who go to outside school listen to their parents all the time? You ought to call up some of those parents, or you should call up the teachers and find out what they have to go through. So the benefit of having a plan on what you're trying to accomplish is that along the way, as you're teaching your child how to compute, how to read, knowledge about history, knowledge about science, you don't have to omit the character lessons that are vital for the child to learn. In the 2 books that I've written on homeschooling, one is called Lessons Learned from Years of Homeschooling, and the other one is called The Homeschool Life. And rather than spend a lot of time telling you how to teach math or how to teach history or geography, the homeschool conventions that Mark talked about, those are excellent places to go and find the curriculum that will suit your fancy on how you think your child will best absorb material. My books were focusing on the mindset and the experiences I had that could have made me give up. And if you talk to anybody who's homeschooled for any length of time, I would say if they're not thinking about once a month that they should give up, that they're probably not normal. Because you think you have it all under control, your child gets some new ability or understanding, and now all bets are off. I used to experience it. You know how you have a child who might be a very wonderful child until that child learns how to walk, then all of a sudden you say, where did this monster come from? Now suddenly that child won't listen to me. Well, the same thing can happen in education, in academic education. As somebody broadens his horizon a little bit, he reads a story about someone, or he gains a new understanding, now that person's going to test the limits and see, I wonder if the rules still apply now that I'm smarter than I was last year, or now that I understand this a little bit better. And so the opportunities that you have when this sinfulness emerges, and I hate to tell you folks, we all have children who are sinful. I know at first it doesn't look like they are, but sooner or later you'll experience the fact that this nice person did some awful thing, and where did this come from? Well, if you know your Bible, you know exactly where it came from. The opportunity you have when the child does that awful thing is to right then and there deal with it, as opposed to when your child does that awful thing at an outside school and puts one over on the teacher because, this is always a nice little girl. She could never do things, and so she knows to set up the boy who's always getting in trouble. And so you build up all sorts of things that you will know nothing about because your children's sinfulness is being manifested in a place where, quite frankly, a teacher with, I don't know what the class sizes are these days, 20, 30, 40, you really think that teacher's getting paid to make sure that your child has integrity? She's probably happy by the end of 10 months that, nobody stabbed someone else and that, we got through it and now she's got a couple of months off, right? So in having a plan on what you want to accomplish, the ideas of grade levels go out the window. Now you'll still, if you put your child in the sports thing, you can't say, well, he's second year college when he's 9 years old, I don't care how advanced he is. They're going to usually do things by grade levels. But you need to be asking yourself, what do I want to accomplish with my son or daughter this year? If I'm going to look at a school year as going from September to June, which in homeschooling you don't have to do. You could do year-round schooling if you wanted. You could decide that between the month of December and January, that's when your vacation was. Because you see, you can suit it to your family. In our household, my husband's a car salesman, and he has been for 33 years. That meant he worked Saturday and Sundays. So Monday was the day that was sort of like the Saturday for my kids, because that's when Dad was off and that's when he could do things with them. See, we were free to do that because that fit into our family life and our situation, and they got time to be with their dad. If we were trying to conform to everybody else's homeschool, we wouldn't have been able to do it that way. In the process, he got to develop a relationship with his children and come in as the principal sometimes when we were having rebellions in the ranks of someone who wasn't going to do what we asked him to do, or things weren't working well, or sometimes when I just needed a break. Because homeschool moms, apart from what the society would like us to think, are doing a very, very important job. Not a little important job, a very important job. That's why, quite frankly, a lot of educators hate us, because if we can accomplish something that they had to go to school for years and years, and a union wants to tell everybody that you have to have a master's degree before you can teach someone how to count, or before you can teach someone how to read, if we can produce good products that are responsible citizens and not, filling up the welfare ranks and everything else, then what does that say about the long road that everybody else thinks that you have to go on to be a good teacher? And you'll discover that some of the smartest people you'll ever run into are veteran homeschool moms. Whenever we've had some conferences where we've brought people in or whatever, my husband will come home and he says, "You ladies are an intimidating bunch. I mean, you know about learning styles, you know about the different ways to approach math or chemistry, audio learners, kinetic learners, visual learners." He's saying, you don't see that in a regular day school setting, because quite frankly the teacher doesn't have a lot of opportunity to figure out what's the best way your child learns. And you're the one who's going to want to make sure that your child is behaving properly, is not a burden to other people, knows how to be honest and loyal. No one else is going to be able to know the intricacies that you've learned of your children during the years before they would even be considered school age. And so as you outline the program of what it is you want for your school, you may need help. You may need somebody to help direct you. And that's one of the reasons that now, since my final homeschooler has graduated from high school this year, I've begun a program of mentoring homeschool moms. And one of the things that I've discovered is that homeschool moms who've been doing it for quite some time failed to continue to be students themselves. And that's one of the most crucial things for you to be able to continue with a successful homeschooling situation, especially if you have multiple children. It's easy to be gung-ho with the first. By the time you're on the 7th or the 8th or the 9th, I don't know if anybody has that many, but where I come from, we have families that have 10 children and 8 children and extensively. How do you keep it fresh? How do you keep it so that you feel that you can still engage in the material? By becoming a better teacher. And when I start the mentoring program with people, A lot of women think that what I'm talking about is they have to learn, how to teach math, or they have to get really good in geometry. And what I usually tell them is, no, what you need to get really good at is understanding how the Bible relates to all of life. Then, when it comes time to selecting curriculum, then when it comes time to decide which course of action you'll take with your child, you'll have a benchmark to be able to say, is this biblical or not? Is this something that honors God or not? Is this something that will help my child? Your children should look at you as someone who does everything you're asking them to do. I can't tell you how many times people have asked me to teach their children writing. And I said, sure. What is it that they see you write? Oh, I'm terrible at writing. I said, oh, that's a big selling point for your child. Mom and dad seem to be doing just fine, and they don't write. So I guess writing is one of those things that I have to do until I get out of school, and then I can be like Mom and Dad and stop doing it. Or the parents who say, I hate math. Well, that's going to be a big selling point for your child. So help my child learn math, but I don't want any part of learning math. You see, if you're learning along with your child, which for a lot of people who had a public school education, they're not very happy with the education they had. I just did a homeschool convention in Santa Clara, and as I was talking to a lot of parents, some of them have been homeschooling for 4, 5, 6 years, I said, don't you wish you had the education you're giving your child? And their answer was, oh, absolutely. But what they're really doing is they're giving themselves the education they wish they had because they're learning alongside their children. When you homeschool, it does not have to be like a day school. It's the biggest thing that people fall into the trap. We knew one family that had the children call their mother Mrs. So-and-so, so it could be like school, because if they ever have to go to school, they have to be ready. I mean, seriously. Whoever said that the best way to learn is at a desk with 30 other people who are your age? I don't know, I would venture to say that we probably have a wide range of ages here, and you're all listening and you're all learning. In other words, I just made the requirement, okay, you have to be 35 to come to this meeting, and then tomorrow we'll do the one for the 37-year-olds, and then we'll do the one for the 40-year-olds, and then, I could be very busy, and if I got you to pay me, I'd be very rich. Oh, maybe that has something to do with why it takes 12 years to be functionally illiterate in a lot of places, because you see, maybe it has more to do with the socialization that Mark was talking about. I saw very early on the difference in my children than in children who had gone to regular school. My son was in a series of karate classes, and the teacher would ask a question, and all the other kids would go, and my son would give out the answer, and he'd say, right, Mr. Schwartz, because in the karate studio there was called you by your last name. And he'd ask another question. All these kids would go like this, and my son goes, Mom, why did they wave at him? Because they're so used to, you have to wait to be called on. Now, I'm not suggesting that people be, rambunctious and disrespectful, but the fact is, really what happens in the socialization, you learn how to stand in line, be quiet, and not object to what you're being taught. Is that what you really want for your children? I dare say that there are a lot of people who are very unhappy with the current economy in the United States, the current state of politics, business, lots of different things. How do you think that lack of integrity came about? You think it came about because people were taught that they should defer pleasure and save, or do you think people were taught you can just go into debt and it'll all be okay? And do you think people really understand how an economy works? Well, see, if you have this microcosm of the family, you can teach that. You can teach your children, how to manage what money you give them. You can teach your children responsibility. When I talk to homeschooling moms who are very harried and I just can't get everything done, I said, when my children are 8 years old, they do their own laundry. And they have to cook at least once a week. Now, Dad, you got to eat your mistakes, but they'll learn. They'll figure it out. They should learn how to iron their own clothes. They should be able to, if you have to do something like refresh yourself and get yourself a little bit more learning in an area that you want to teach, you should be able to send them to the grocery store with a list and have them get the groceries. At our house, Saturday was cleaning day. The oldest always was the one who supervised the cleaning. So he might have his younger sisters the dusting or this, that, the other thing. In other words, we were preparing him for life. And my son's wife will tell you she's very grateful because he had to take care of his sisters when they were younger. And we've been doing this for a long time. So he was 14 when she was born. And so he had to learn to change diapers. He had to learn how to babysit. He had to learn to do all these things. By the time he became a dad, it wasn't foreign material to him. And so the whole idea of a homeschool is to prepare somebody for life. Now, you may not know by the time Johnny's 7 if he's going to be the next Supreme Court Justice, or he's going to be own his own plumbing business, or he's going to be a construction worker, or is he going to be a doctor. That really isn't so important as that if he does any of those things, that he does it in a godly way with integrity. And along the line, you're going to get pretty creative yourself on how you deal with the challenges. But if your children see that along the way they've got parents who are willing to learn, are eager to learn, and are trying to get better at what it is they do, by the time they go to college and they have some professor who has a bunch of letters after his name and is trying to impress them on the fact that they really don't need their parents and they should be independent people and everything else, your children will know otherwise. Your children will understand that their parents really gave them a first-class education. My husband used to call it the education of kings and queens, having one-on-one. In a lot of ways, when you homeschool, it's like a one-on-one tutoring. The best part is you teach your child how to read, you teach your child how to think, and then a lot of it happens on its own. I can remember there was a movie out about the submarine. What was that called? You something or other. Anyway, I went with my daughter to, I can't remember it now, but it was when they had decoded something during World War II, and it was how they had to get this decoding box off a submarine. And I'm sitting in the movie, and I am totally lost. I don't understand. And there she is whispering to me, explaining how submarines work. And I'm thinking, I'm your teacher. How did you learn this? And she said, oh, remember we used to go to the library? I got all those books out on submarines. So she was very knowledgeable on submarines, and I thanked her because I understood the movie, what was happening and what they were doing and such. But in other words, there was an interest in something, and she could pursue it. So she didn't have to wait. She didn't have to wait to be told, you now are going to learn about submarines. Or the first time I gave her, a Charles Dickens book. She loved Charles Dickens. So you know what? She read every Charles Dickens book she had. It wasn't on our curriculum. She never would have been able to do that. But she pursued it because it was something she was interested in. With my son, it was making money. So he was always starting businesses, whether it was a car wash business or a lemonade stand or making T-shirts or whatever it was. But within the context of our family, he could do that, and then other things came into play. Are you going to keep your records? At one point, do you need to have a resale license to be able to sell your stuff? So what subject was that? Well, that was economics, that was finance, that was banking, it was a lot of things. And suddenly you can have a very interesting life because you can choose your vacations based on something that one of your children want to learn or what you would like them to learn. In our case, sports was a big thing for my husband, and so my girls were competitive junior golfers, and so we were able to do a lot of golf tournaments, but we were able to tailor a schedule around golf practice, and it was something that worked for us. Do I recommend that everybody do that? No, because you may not like golf, or you may not have the opportunity to do that, but there may be something else that you'd like to do. And so if you look at it as the freedom to explore things, the freedom to explore God's creation, and then be able to learn about it and do something with it, think about it. Thomas Edison was homeschooled. Would he have come up with the light bulb if he had sat in rows and this, that? They'd probably tell him his ideas were crazy and he probably shouldn't, turn off that light and go to bed or something like that, as the joke goes. But anyway, the idea is that whatever fears you had, as Marx says, they really pale in comparison to the wonderful opportunity and privilege you've been given. By the time you raise a child and you've taught that child, and even if there's areas or subject areas you're not very good at and that you're going to farm it out to someone else, that's fine. At the end, you'll know your child. You'll know his strengths, you'll know his weaknesses, you can play to his strengths, and you can help improve those weaknesses. And you can do it within a context of who you answer to is to God. And I think if you think about that, it's a lot better than answering to some impersonal bureaucrat who really doesn't care all that much. Before I open it for questions, there's I didn't write what I'm about to read to you, but I saw it a couple of years ago on Mother's Day, and Sunday we're coming up on Mother's Day, and he entitled it The Mother's War. Mother's Day is, to be honest, somewhat of an annoyance. It's manifestly one of those tedious hallmark holidays wherein everyone is supposed to run out and support the revenue stream of cardboard manufacturers in the name of expressing gratitude to mothers, fathers, grandparents, and anyone else to whom we might be related. I imagine it won't be long until September 18th is declared Anonymous Sperm Donors Day, which will probably be celebrated by giving matching card sets to one's two mommies and lighting a candle for dear old anonymous sperm donor, whoever he might be. Mothers are not only important, they are absolutely vital due to their position as frontline shock troops in the ongoing centuries-long struggle for the survival of Western civilization. Despite the fact that their maternal instinct has been harassed, criticized, mocked, belittled, and subjected to a 40-year effort to indoctrinate it out of existence, our mothers stubbornly continue doing the only thing we actually need women to do in order for our civilization to survive: bearing and raising children. We don't need female doctors. We don't need female scientists. We don't need female entrepreneurs. We don't need female producers of PowerPoint presentations. And we really don't need female politicians. While we can argue about whether such luxuries are beneficial or detrimental to society, there is no arguing the empirical evidence which proves that civilization has survived without them before and could easily do so again. But without mothers, there is no civilization. Without mothers, there is no future for the civilized. Europe is in the process of discovering what a world without mothers is like. It is an ugly picture, a brutal picture. It is a probable future that promises to be much worse than the most exaggerated images of past patriarchal oppression ever painted by Betty Friedan or Gloria Steinem. Without mothers, there is only barbarism and the choice between the brothel and the burqa. Motherhood is a sacrifice. It may mean putting off a college education and a career, or even giving them up entirely. It may mean sacrificing a flawless figure. It may mean sacrificing dreams. It definitely means putting 2, 3, 4, or more lives ahead of your own. But motherhood is also an expression of hope. Motherhood is a vote of confidence in the future of mankind. Motherhood is the brave voice of a woman saying, "I will not live life for today. I will create life for many tomorrows." Cards, gifts, and flowers are no adequate expression of gratitude for this living statement of faith. In the ongoing war against Christian civilization, it is the mothers who matter most. The sterile secularists don't fear Christian intellectuals or Christian pastors. They regard the former as petty annoyances, and there's little need to worry about 1 weekly hour of Christian teaching on Sundays overcoming 40 hours of secular reprogramming from Monday to Friday. But they fear our mothers, who can create children faster than they can manage to indoctrinate them. And they are downright terrified of our homeschooling mothers, who rob them of their primary means of creating a new generation of secular barbarians. Every time a woman says, "I do," every time a wife turns to her husband and says, "Let's have another baby," every time a mother hugs her child and says, "How would you like me to be your teacher?" she is striking a powerful blow in defense of her faith, her family, her church, and God. We should celebrate these bold decisions, these audacious acts, as victories, not just for the family and the faith, but for civilization and mankind. It is not enough to thank our mothers. We owe them a debt that cannot be repaid. but we can and we must love them, honor them, support them, and sustain them as they faithfully continue to wage their mother's war. And let me tell you that I see it as I look back and I look at the families of people who have raised their children. And I should clarify and say not all of them are always walking in the faith of their parents. Sometimes you have the sad circumstance where one of your children turns away from the faith. But if you've taught them, and if you've taught them well, you don't have to have the regret that says, if only I had done this. What you can say is, I know what I put into them, and I know that they heard the truth. And that's an important thing, because one of the things you'll discover is that you didn't create your child really. You may have done the means by which the child was there, but God had to determine whether or not that there was going to be a conception. And you're not responsible as to whether or not that person ever lives his faith, but you're responsible to have taught the faith.